Sarah had always believed in fairy tales. Growing up in a modest apartment above her father's bakery, she would spend hours reading romance novels, dreaming of a life filled with glamour and endless possibilities. When she met David at 22, fresh out of college and working as a receptionist at a small accounting firm, she thought she had found her Prince Charming. He wasn't wealthy, but he had kind eyes and gentle hands that spoke of honest work. David was an electrician then, learning his trade and saving every penny for their future together. Their wedding was simple but beautiful. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, carefully altered to fit her petite frame, and David borrowed his father's only good suit. They exchanged vows in a small church filled with family and friends, promising to love each other through thick and thin, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Sarah meant every word that day, her heart overflowing with love for the man who made her laugh and held her close when she cried. For the first few years, they were genuinely happy. They rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment where David would come home covered in dust and wire marks, his face lighting up when he saw Sarah waiting for him. She would have dinner ready, usually something simple but made with love. They would sit together on their second-hand couch, sharing stories about their day, making plans for the future. David talked about starting his own electrical business someday, maybe buying a little house with a garden where Sarah could grow the flowers she loved so much. Sarah worked part-time at a boutique downtown, helping customers choose outfits for special occasions. She enjoyed the work, but sometimes when wealthy clients came in, trying on designer dresses that cost more than she and David made in a month, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have that kind of money. She would touch the silk fabrics and imagine herself draped in luxury, attending elegant parties, traveling to exotic places she had only seen in magazines. "Someday we'll have nice things too," David would tell her when she mentioned the beautiful clothes at work. "I'm working extra hours this month. Maybe we can take a weekend trip to the coast." Sarah would smile and nod, but deep down, she began to feel that someday was taking too long to arrive. She was 27 now, and their life seemed to be moving in slow motion while everyone else was racing ahead. Her college friends were posting pictures on social media from expensive restaurants and vacation destinations, showing off engagement rings with diamonds bigger than anything she had ever seen. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Sarah was working late at the boutique, helping to prepare for a private shopping event the next day. The store owner, Mrs. Henderson, had invited several of the city's wealthiest women to preview the new winter collection. As Sarah carefully arranged the jewelry display, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Marcus Wellington was 42 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and a presence that filled the room. He wore a coat that Sarah recognized as the same brand the boutique sold for $3,000, and his watch caught the light in a way that suggested it cost more than most people's cars. He was there to buy something special for his mother's birthday, he explained in a voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I need something elegant, but not too flashy," Marcus said, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the jewelry counter. "My mother has refined taste. She appreciates quality over ostentation." Sarah found herself nervous in a way she hadn't felt in years. There was something magnetic about Marcus, the way he spoke with quiet confidence, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about the pieces she showed him. When he finally selected a delicate pearl necklace, he handed her his credit card without even asking the price. "You have excellent taste," he said, as Sarah processed the transaction. "I can tell you understand beauty when you see it." The compliment sent a warm flush through Sarah's cheeks. When was the last time someone had spoken to her like that? David loved her, she knew that, But their conversations had become routine, predictable. This stranger was looking at her as if she were something precious, something worth paying attention to. "I hope your mother loves it," Sarah managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus smiled, and Sarah noticed how perfectly straight and white his teeth were. "I'm sure she will. You know, I don't usually shop for jewelry myself. I have assistants who handle this sort of thing. But I was driving by and saw this place, and something made me want to come in personally." He paused at the door, turning back to look at her. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in having dinner with me tomorrow night? I know a wonderful little place that serves the most incredible French cuisine. Nothing too fancy, just a chance to thank you properly for your help today." Sarah's heart began to race. She looked down at her wedding ring, the simple gold band that David had saved for months to buy. It seemed so plain suddenly, so ordinary, compared to the world Marcus represented. "I'm married," she said quietly. But even as she spoke the words, she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Marcus nodded, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. "Of course you are. A woman like you wouldn't be unattached for long. Your husband is a lucky man." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it gently on the counter. "If you ever change your mind about dinner, or if you're ever interested in seeing how the other half lives, give me a call. Sometimes we all need a little adventure in our lives." And then he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the business card that seemed to pulse with possibility. Sarah stared at it for a long time, reading the embossed letters. Marcus Wellington, CEO, Wellington Enterprises. She had heard of the company, of course. They owned half the commercial real estate in the city. When Sarah got home that night, David was already asleep on the couch, still in his work clothes. There was a note on the kitchen table explaining that he had tried to wait up for her but had been working since 5 in the morning. He had heated up leftover spaghetti for himself and left some in the refrigerator for her. Sarah looked at her husband's sleeping form, his face peaceful and trusting, and felt a stab of guilt. She crumpled up Marcus's business card and threw it in the trash. But the next morning, while David was in the shower, she found herself digging through the garbage to retrieve it. The card sat in Sarah's purse for 3 weeks, calling to her every time she opened it to pay for groceries or search for her keys. She found herself thinking about Marcus at odd moments, wondering what that dinner would have been like, what stories he might have told her about his travels and business dealings. When David came home excited because he had landed a contract to rewire an entire office building, Sarah tried to match his enthusiasm, but all she could think about was how different her life might be if she had made different choices. The boutique's holiday party was the following Friday. Mrs. Henderson always threw an elegant affair for her best customers and staff, complete with champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. Sarah had been looking forward to it for weeks, mainly because it meant she could wear one of the store's beautiful dresses, something she could never afford to buy, but was allowed to borrow for special occasions. She chose a midnight blue cocktail dress that hugged her figure perfectly and made her eyes look deeper and more mysterious than usual. David whistled appreciatively when he saw her getting ready. "You look gorgeous, honey," he said, straightening his tie. He had bought a new shirt for the occasion, nothing expensive, but clean and pressed. "I'm proud to be your date tonight." Sarah forced a smile, but inside she felt a familiar pang of discontent. David was trying so hard, and she loved him for it. But standing next to the wealthy men who would be at the party, he would look exactly like what he was, a working-class man pretending to belong in a world that wasn't his. The party was in full swing when they arrived. Mrs. Henderson had transformed the boutique into a winter wonderland with white lights and silver decorations that made everything sparkle. Sarah introduced David to her co-workers and some of the regular customers, watching as he tried to make conversation about topics he knew nothing about. When Mrs. Patterson, one of the store's biggest spenders, mentioned her recent trip to the south of France, David nodded politely but had nothing to contribute to the conversation. Sarah was getting David a second glass of champagne when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Marcus Wellington, looking even more devastatingly handsome than she remembered, in a perfectly tailored black suit.
"Sarah," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "I was hoping I'd see you here tonight. Mrs. Henderson and I serve on the Children's Hospital Board together. She invited me to stop by." Sarah's pulse quickened. "That's wonderful that you support such a good cause." Marcus smiled. "I believe in giving back to the community. Speaking of which, I never heard from you about that dinner invitation." Sarah glanced across the room to where David was standing with a small group, looking slightly uncomfortable but gamely trying to follow a conversation about wine vintages. "I told you, I'm married." "Yes, I see your husband over there. He seems like a nice man. Very different from you, though." "What do you mean?" Marcus moved a step closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "You have a spark, Sarah. An intelligence and sophistication that's rare. I can see it in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak. You're meant for bigger things than this little boutique, beautiful as it is." Sarah felt herself blushing. "I'm happy with my life." "Are you?" Marcus asked gently. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're settling for less than you deserve." Before Sarah could respond, David appeared at her side, his face curious but not suspicious. "Hi there, I'm David, Sarah's husband." Marcus extended his hand with practiced ease. "Marcus Wellington. I was just telling your wife how lucky I feel to have found this lovely boutique. She has exquisite taste." David beamed with pride. "She sure does. I'm always telling her she should be running her own store someday." "An excellent idea," Marcus agreed. "Sarah, we should discuss that over dinner sometime. I'm always interested in supporting promising entrepreneurs." Sarah felt caught between two worlds, torn between David's trusting smile and Marcus's knowing gaze. "That's very kind of you to offer." Marcus handed her another business card, this one different from the first. "This has my private number on it. Call me next week and we'll set something up. Strictly business, of course." As Marcus walked away, David squeezed Sarah's hand. "What a nice guy. And rich, too, from the looks of that watch. Maybe he could really help you start your own business someday." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were spinning. She tucked the business card into her purse, next to the first one she still carried.
That night, as David slept peacefully beside her, Sarah stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to her. She had a good husband who loved her, a decent job, a roof over her head. By most measures, she was living a successful life. So why did she feel so empty? Why did Marcus's attention make her feel more alive than she had in years? The answer came to her slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape she had been too afraid to examine. She was bored, desperately, achingly bored with the predictability of her existence. David would come home from work, they would eat dinner, watch television, and go to bed. Weekends were spent running errands, visiting his parents, or staying home to clean the apartment. Their biggest excitement was the occasional dinner at the local Italian restaurant for their anniversary. Sarah tried to push these thoughts away, telling herself she was being ungrateful and shallow. But they persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. When she watched movies about people living glamorous lives, she felt a physical ache in her chest. When she helped wealthy customers at the boutique, she found herself imagining what it would be like to be in their shoes, never having to check a price tag or worry about making rent. The turning point came 3 weeks later, on a snowy afternoon in January. Sarah was alone in the boutique, doing inventory, when Marcus appeared again. This time, he wasn't shopping for anyone else. "I was hoping I'd catch you alone," he said, approaching the counter where she was working. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her clipboard. "What about?" Marcus leaned against the counter, his eyes serious. I've been thinking about our conversation at the party, about you starting your own business. I meant what I said about wanting to help. That's very generous, but I don't think David would be comfortable with me borrowing money from someone we barely know. Who said anything about borrowing? Marcus asked. I'm talking about investing. I have a proposal for you, Sarah, a real opportunity to change your life. Sarah's heart began to race. What kind of opportunity?
Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I own several commercial properties downtown. One of them would be perfect for an upscale boutique. Bigger than this place, better location, room to really showcase beautiful things. I'm willing to lease it to you at below market rates, help you get started with inventory and marketing. Sarah opened the folder and gasped. The photographs showed a beautiful storefront with huge windows and elegant fixtures. The proposed lease terms were incredibly generous, far better than anything she could have negotiated on her own. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze intense. "Because I see something special in you, Sarah. You have potential that's being wasted here. And I'll be honest, I'm attracted to you. I have been since the moment I walked into this store." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "Marcus, I told you I'm married." "I know, and I respect that. But I also know that marriage isn't always enough. Sometimes two people can love each other and still not be right for each other. Sometimes we outgrow the choices we made when we were young and didn't know who we really were." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne again, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions today. Just think about it. Think about what you really want from life. Think about whether you're truly happy or just comfortable." Sarah looked down at the folder again, her mind reeling with possibilities. Her own boutique, financial independence, the chance to be somebody important, somebody who mattered. "I need time," she said finally. Marcus smiled. "Of course, but don't take too long, Sarah. Opportunities like this don't come along every day." That evening, Sarah sat across from David at their small kitchen table, picking at the takeout Chinese food he had brought home. He was talking about his day, something about a difficult wiring job and a customer who had tried to negotiate down his rates, but Sarah barely heard him. All she could think about was the folder hidden in her purse and the choice that lay before her. "You're quiet tonight," David observed, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Everything okay?" Sarah looked at her husband, really looked at him. His hair was still damp from his post-work shower, and he had a small cut on his chin from shaving. His hands were rough from years of manual labor, but they were gentle when they touched her. He loved her completely, without reservation, without conditions. She knew that if she told him about Marcus's offer, he would be happy for her opportunity, even if it meant financial risk for them both. And that knowledge made what she was contemplating feel even more wrong. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." David nodded and continued eating, trusting her word completely. That trust felt like a weight on Sarah's chest, making it hard to breathe. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself researching Marcus Wellington online, learning about his business empire and his personal life. He had been married once, to a socialite who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. There were photos of him at charity events and business functions, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by beautiful, sophisticated people. The world he inhabited was exactly what Sarah had always dreamed of joining. She began staying late at the boutique, telling David she was working on inventory or helping Mrs. Henderson with special projects. In reality, she was spending hours staring at Marcus's business proposal, imagining herself as the owner of an elegant boutique, wearing designer clothes and hosting exclusive events. The fantasy became more real and more appealing with each passing day. Meanwhile, David seemed to sense something was different, though he couldn't put his finger on what. He tried to be more attentive, bringing Sarah flowers from the grocery store and suggesting they go out for dinner more often. His efforts only made Sarah feel more guilty, and her guilt made her more distant, creating a vicious cycle that pushed them further apart. The final straw came on a rainy Saturday morning in February. Sarah and David were at the home improvement store, looking at tile samples for their tiny bathroom. David was excited about the renovation project, talking animatedly about installing new fixtures and maybe even a larger mirror. As they stood in the fluorescent-lit showroom, surrounded by other couples making similar modest improvements to their modest lives, Sarah felt a wave of claustrophobia so intense it nearly knocked her over.
This was it. This was her life. Standing in discount stores, choosing between 2 shades of beige tile, planning small improvements to a rental apartment she would probably never own. While across town, Marcus was probably making decisions that affected thousands of people, living in a world where money was no object and dreams became reality. "I need some air," Sarah said suddenly, pushing through the crowded store and out into the parking lot. David followed, concern written across his face. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah stood in the rain, feeling it soak through her jacket, and realized she couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't keep living this life, pretending to be satisfied with so little when she knew there was so much more available to her. "David," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to tell you something." They went home and sat in their living room, the same room where they had spent so many quiet evenings together, planning their future and sharing their dreams. Now it felt like a prison, with its second-hand furniture and outdated decorations. Sarah told David about Marcus, about the business proposal, about the feelings she had been struggling with. She tried to be gentle, to explain that it wasn't about him, that he hadn't done anything wrong. But how do you tell someone you love that love isn't enough anymore? How do you explain that the life you built together feels too small for the person you've discovered you want to be? David listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. When Sarah finished talking, he was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "So, what are you saying?" he asked finally. "That you want a divorce?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I just know that I can't keep pretending to be happy when I'm not. I feel like I'm drowning, David, like I'm disappearing." David looked up at her then, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "I thought we were happy. I thought we were building something together." We did, but maybe we've built as much as we can build together." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is about the money, isn't it? About me not being able to give you the things you want." "It's not about the money," Sarah protested, though even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. "It's about possibilities, about having the chance to become who I'm meant to be." "And who you're meant to be doesn't include me." Sarah couldn't answer that question, and her silence was answer enough. David moved out the next week, staying with his brother while they figured out the details of their separation. Sarah called Marcus the day after David left, her hands shaking as she dialed his private number. "I've been waiting for your call," Marcus said, his voice warm and pleased. "I take it you've made your decision?" "Yes," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I want to do this. The boutique, I mean." "Wonderful. But, Sarah, I want you to know that the business opportunity isn't the only reason I hoped you'd call. I meant what I said about being attracted to you. I'd like the chance to show you what life could be like with someone who can give you everything you deserve." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of David's face when she had told him she wanted to separate. "I'm not ready for that yet. I need time to figure things out." "Of course, but I hope you'll let me take you to dinner to celebrate your new venture. Nothing romantic, just a chance to discuss the business details in a more pleasant setting than a law office." 3 days later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Marcus in the city's most exclusive French restaurant, wearing a dress she had borrowed from the boutique, and feeling like she was playing a role in someone else's life. The restaurant was everything she had imagined: crystal chandeliers, crisp white tablecloths, waiters who moved with ballet-like precision. The menu had no prices, which Marcus explained meant that if you had to ask, you couldn't afford to eat there. "You look beautiful," Marcus said, raising his champagne glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Sarah sipped the champagne, which was better than any wine she had ever tasted, and tried to enjoy the moment. But she couldn't stop thinking about David, probably eating a microwaved dinner alone in his brother's spare room. Marcus was an entertaining dinner companion, telling stories about his travels and business dealings with the kind of casual confidence that came from a lifetime of success. He had been to Paris 12 times, owned homes in 3 different cities, and spoke about famous people as if they were personal friends. Sarah found herself fascinated despite her emotional turmoil.
"The key to success," Marcus was saying as their main courses arrived, "is recognizing opportunity when it presents itself and having the courage to act on it. Most people are too afraid of change to ever achieve anything significant." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Taking a courageous leap?" Marcus smiled, cutting into his perfectly prepared steak. "I think you're finally allowing yourself to want more than a small, safe life. There's nothing wrong with wanting beautiful things, Sarah. There's nothing wrong with ambition." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing, laughing at Marcus's stories, and enjoying the attention of the sophisticated man across from her. When the bill came, Marcus didn't even glance at it, simply handed over a credit card with the casual gesture of someone for whom money was no object. "Thank you for dinner," Sarah said, as they waited for the valet to bring Marcus's car around. "It was incredible." "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. "Wait until you see what else the world has to offer." The car that arrived was a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than Sarah and David had ever made in a combined year. Marcus held the door open for her, and as she slid into the leather seat, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She looked like a different person, elegant and sophisticated, someone who belonged in this world of luxury and privilege. Marcus drove her home to the apartment she had once shared with David, now half empty and echoing with loneliness. As they sat in the driveway, the engine purring softly, Marcus turned to her. "I know this is all new for you," he said gently. "The business, the separation from your husband, everything. I don't want to pressure you into anything you're not ready for, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever you need." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "You don't have to be alone through this, Sarah. You don't have to figure everything out by yourself." Sarah looked into Marcus's eyes and saw genuine care there, along with something deeper and more complicated. "I appreciate that. I really do. It's just all happening so fast." "The best things in life usually do happen fast," Marcus said. "We can spend so much time thinking and planning that we miss the moment when we should act." He leaned closer, and Sarah felt her heart racing. "May I kiss you?" Sarah knew she should say no. She was still legally married, still sorting through her feelings about David and their failed marriage. But sitting in that expensive car,
feeling beautiful and desired by a man who represented everything she had ever wanted, she found herself nodding. Marcus's kiss was nothing like David's kisses. It was confident and skilled, the kiss of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and what he wanted. Sarah felt herself responding despite her reservations, her body coming alive in ways it hadn't in years. When they finally broke apart, Sarah was breathless. "I should go inside." "Yes, you should," Marcus agreed, but he didn't move away from her. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've never met anyone like you. You're not like the other women I've known. There's an authenticity to you, a realness that's incredibly attractive." Sarah felt herself glowing under his praise. When was the last time David had told her she was special? When was the last time anyone had made her feel like she was worth pursuing, worth fighting for? "I'll call you tomorrow about the lease documents," Marcus said as Sarah got out of the car. "And Sarah, don't second-guess yourself. You're doing the right thing." Sarah watched him drive away, then climbed the stairs to her empty apartment. For the first time since David had moved out, she didn't cry herself to sleep. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly simple. David didn't fight her on anything, agreeing to split their minimal assets and going along with Sarah's request for a quick, no-fault dissolution. Sarah told herself this proved they had grown apart naturally, that David understood their marriage had run its course. But the truth was that David was heartbroken, and his lack of resistance came from a combination of shock and a desperate hope that if he made things easy for her, she might change her mind. "I just want you to be happy," he told her when they met with the lawyers. "If this is what you need to be happy, then I won't stand in your way." His generosity made Sarah worse, not better. It would have been easier if he had fought her, if he had been angry or vindictive. Instead, he was the same kind, selfless man she had fallen in love with 7 years earlier, which only emphasized how much she had changed. While the legal proceedings dragged on, Sarah threw herself into planning her new boutique. Marcus was true to his word, providing her with a beautiful storefront in the heart of the city's upscale shopping district, and connecting her with suppliers and contractors who could transform her vision into reality. The lease terms were so generous they were almost suspicious, but when Sarah questioned Marcus about it, he just smiled and told her to consider it an investment in her future. Sarah spent her days choosing fixtures and inventory, working with designers to create the elegant atmosphere she had always dreamed of. Marcus was involved in every decision, offering opinions and suggestions with the confidence of someone who understood luxury markets. He introduced her to his circle of wealthy friends, women who could become her core customers if she played her cards right. As the boutique neared its opening, Sarah found herself spending more and more time with Marcus. What had started as business dinners evolved into regular dates. Marcus was charming and attentive, taking Sarah to exclusive restaurants and private clubs where she was introduced as his friend, but treated as something much more significant. He bought her expensive gifts, elegant jewelry, and designer clothes that made her feel like the sophisticated woman she was trying to become. "You're transforming before my eyes," Marcus told her one evening as they walked through the botanical gardens after dinner at his country club. "When I first met you, you were like a butterfly still in its cocoon. Now look at you." Sarah looked down at herself, wearing a $1,000 dress and shoes that cost more than she used to spend on clothes in an entire year. Her hair had been styled by Marcus's personal stylist, and she was wearing makeup applied by a professional artist. She did look different, polished and refined in a way that would have seemed impossible just a few months earlier. "I feel different too," she admitted. "Sometimes I barely recognize myself." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Marcus asked, stopping to face her in the moonlight. "I think it's good," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure. I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be." Marcus smiled and pulled her into his arms. "You're everything I knew you could be, and more." Their relationship became physical that night. In Marcus's beautiful penthouse apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and museum-quality art. Sarah had never experienced anything like it. Not just the physical intimacy, but the setting, the sense of being part of something larger and more important than her previous life. Lying in Marcus's arms afterward, looking out at the city lights below, she felt like she was finally living the life she deserved. The boutique opened 6 months after Sarah's divorce was finalized. The grand opening party was everything she had dreamed it would be, filled with the city's elite shopping for beautiful things and drinking expensive champagne. Sarah moved through the crowd in a designer gown, playing hostess and feeling more confident and alive than she ever had before. Marcus was at her side, introducing her to important people and making sure everyone understood that she was under his protection. "You've outdone yourself," Mrs. Patterson, her former customer from the old boutique, told her as she examined a particularly beautiful evening bag. "This place is absolutely stunning. You must be so proud." Sarah was proud, but underneath the satisfaction was a nagging sense of emptiness she couldn't quite identify. She should have been completely happy. She had everything she had ever wanted: her own successful business, a wealthy and attractive boyfriend, a lifestyle that most people could only dream of. So why did she sometimes lie awake at night feeling like something was missing? The answer came to her gradually over the following months, as the reality of her new life began to settle in. Marcus was generous and attentive, but he was also controlling in ways that hadn't been apparent during their courtship. He had opinions about everything: how Sarah should dress, who she should befriend, even how she should run her business. His suggestions were always presented as helpful guidance, but Sarah slowly realized that disagreeing with him was not really an option. "I think you should drop that supplier," Marcus said one evening as they reviewed the boutique's monthly reports. "Their quality isn't consistent with the image we're trying to project." "We?" Sarah asked, looking up from the paperwork. "I thought this was my business." Marcus's smile was patient but firm. "Of course it's your business, darling, but I have a significant investment in its success, and I have more experience with luxury markets than you do. Trust me on this." Sarah wanted to argue, but Marcus had been right about so many things in the past. The boutique was doing well, better than she had ever imagined it could. Maybe it was worth listening to his advice, even if it sometimes felt more like orders than suggestions. The social aspect of her new life was equally complicated. Marcus's friends were wealthy and sophisticated, but Sarah often felt like she was performing rather than simply being herself. The conversations were about people and places she didn't know, business dealings she didn't understand, social hierarchies she was still learning to navigate. She found herself carefully measuring her words, afraid of saying something that would reveal her middle-class background. "You're doing wonderfully," Marcus would reassure her when she expressed these concerns. "These people can smell insecurity from a mile away. The key is to act like you belong, and eventually you will belong." But Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to belong to a world where authenticity was seen as a weakness, and where people were valued primarily for their wealth and connections. The women in Marcus's circle were beautiful and polished, but many of them seemed brittle underneath, as if they had sacrificed something essential in their pursuit of perfection. Sarah began to wonder if she was becoming like them, if she was losing pieces of herself that she couldn't afford to lose.
The final wake-up call came on a cold December evening, almost exactly 2 years after she had met Marcus. Sarah had been feeling unwell for several days, struggling with nausea and fatigue that she attributed to stress from the busy holiday shopping season. When she finally went to the doctor, she learned that she was pregnant. Sarah sat in her car in the doctor's parking lot, staring at the test results and trying to process what this meant for her life. She and Marcus had never discussed children, had never talked about a future that included anything beyond the glamorous present they were living. Sarah realized she had no idea how he would react to this news, or what kind of father he might be. That evening, she made Marcus his favorite dinner and waited for the right moment to tell him. He was in a good mood, having just closed a major real estate deal, and Sarah thought perhaps the timing was perfect. "Marcus," she said as they finished their wine, "I have something important to tell you." Something in her tone must have alerted him, because his expression became guarded. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was longer than Sarah had expected. Marcus set down his wineglass very carefully, his face unreadable. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "Yes, I saw the doctor today. I'm about 6 weeks along." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Sarah watched him, her heart sinking, as the seconds ticked by without a response. "This is unexpected," he said finally, not turning around. "I know, it wasn't planned, but maybe it's not such a terrible thing. We've been together for almost 2 years now. Maybe it's time to think about the next step." Marcus turned back to her then, and Sarah was shocked by the coldness in his eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sarah?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we should get married, that maybe we should start a family together." Marcus returned to his seat, but didn't reach for her hand. "Sarah, I think you may have misunderstood what this relationship is about." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've never given you any reason to believe this was leading to marriage and children. I'm 45 years old. I've been married before, and I have no interest in doing it again. And children at this stage of my life? That's not something I want." Sarah felt the floor dropping out from under her. "But I thought, the way you talked about us, about our future." "I talked about your future, Sarah, about helping you build your business and become successful. But I never promised you a fairy tale ending." The cruelty in his voice was like a physical blow. "So, what are you saying? That you want me to get rid of the baby?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture casual and devastating. "That's your choice to make, but I want to be very clear that if you choose to keep it, you'll be doing so alone. I'm not interested in playing house, Sarah. I thought I had made that clear."
Sarah stared at him in disbelief. This was the man who had told her she was special, who had promised to show her what life could be like with someone who could give her everything she deserved. Now, faced with the natural consequence of their relationship, he was treating her like an inconvenience to be managed. "You're telling me that after 2 years together, you feel nothing for me beyond physical attraction?" Marcus sighed, as if he were dealing with a particularly slow child. "Sarah, you're a beautiful woman, and I've enjoyed our time together. But let's be honest about what this has been. You were a married woman looking for excitement, and I was happy to provide it. You got your divorce, you got your boutique, you got a taste of the lifestyle you wanted. We both got what we needed from this arrangement." The word arrangement hit Sarah like a slap. "Is that all I've been to you? An arrangement?" "Don't be naive," Marcus said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Did you really think a man in my position would seriously consider marrying someone like you? You're lovely, but you're not exactly in my social class, are you? The wives of men like me don't come from above bakeries, Sarah." The mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath the charming facade. Sarah saw now what she had been too blinded by desire and ambition to see before. Marcus had never respected her, had never seen her as an equal. She had been a plaything, a diversion, someone to enjoy until he grew bored or she became inconvenient. "I need you to leave," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. "I think that's for the best. But, Sarah, don't do anything rash. Think carefully about what you want your future to look like. A single mother running a small boutique isn't exactly the glamorous life you were hoping for." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the apartment he had bought for her, surrounded by all the beautiful things that suddenly felt meaningless. The designer furniture, the expensive art, the closet full of clothes that cost more than most people's cars. None of it mattered now. She was pregnant and alone, further from her dreams than she had ever been. Over the next few weeks, as Sarah grappled with her situation, she began to understand the true nature of the world she had been so eager to join. Marcus's friends, who had been so welcoming when she was under his protection, suddenly became unavailable when word got out about their breakup. Invitations stopped coming, phone calls went unreturned. Sarah realized that she had never been accepted for herself, but only as Marcus's current companion. The boutique, which had seemed like such a triumph, revealed itself to be another form of control. When Sarah examined the lease agreement more carefully, she discovered clauses that gave Marcus significant power over her business decisions. The generous terms he had offered came with strings attached, and those strings were now being pulled tight. "I'm afraid we're going to have to discuss some changes to our arrangement," Marcus's lawyer informed her during a meeting she had requested to clarify her legal position. "Mr. Wellington feels that the boutique would be better served with a more experienced manager." Sarah realized she was being systematically stripped of everything Marcus had given her, everything she had thought she had earned through her own efforts. The beautiful life she had built was revealing itself to be a house of cards, constructed entirely on another person's whims. Meanwhile, David had not been standing still during the 2 years since their divorce. The pain of losing Sarah had driven him to work harder than ever before, pouring all his energy into building the electrical contracting business he had always dreamed of. What had started as a way to distract himself from heartbreak had grown into something significant. David hired his first employee 8 months after the divorce, then a second 6 months later. By the time Sarah was discovering the true nature of her relationship with Marcus, David was running a crew of 12 electricians and had contracts with some of the city's largest construction companies. Success hadn't made him wealthy in Marcus's sense of the word, but it had given him something more valuable: self-respect and the knowledge that he was building something lasting with his own hands. More importantly, David had used the time to become a better version of himself. He had started reading business books, taken classes in management and accounting, even hired a personal trainer to get in better physical shape. The shy, uncertain young man Sarah had married had grown into a confident, successful businessman who commanded respect in his industry. But David's greatest growth had been emotional. The devastation of losing Sarah had forced him to examine his own shortcomings, to acknowledge the ways he had perhaps taken their marriage for granted. He had learned to communicate better, to be more attentive to the people in his life, to appreciate what he had while he still had it. "You're a different man than you were 3 years ago,"
his brother Tom observed one evening as they shared a beer after a long day of work. Stronger, more sure of yourself. David nodded, looking out at the construction site where his crew was working late to meet a deadline. Losing Sarah was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the thing that made me grow up, I guess. Made me realize I couldn't just coast through life expecting things to work out. Do you ever think about trying to get her back? David was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, but she made her choice. She wanted something I couldn't give her then. Maybe I could give it to her now, but that's not really the point anymore, is it? She chose someone else. She chose a different life. What if she changed her mind? What if things didn't work out with that rich guy? David smiled sadly. Then I hope she finds happiness somewhere else. I loved her enough to let her go when she wanted to leave. I love her enough now to want what's best for her, even if that's not me. David had dated other women over the past 2 years, but nothing had developed into anything serious. He told himself he was focused on his business, but the truth was that no one had measured up to the memory of what he and Sarah had shared in their good times. He was learning to be content with his own company, to find fulfillment in his work and friendships, rather than looking for someone else to complete him. The reckoning Sarah had been unconsciously dreading came on a rainy Thursday morning in March. She had spent a sleepless night wrestling with her options, knowing that time was running out for making decisions about her pregnancy. At 12 weeks along, she was beginning to show, and she couldn't hide her condition much longer. The boutique was struggling without Marcus's financial backing and social connections. Several of her biggest suppliers had mysteriously canceled their contracts, clearly responding to pressure from Marcus or his associates. The rent on the beautiful storefront, which had seemed so reasonable when Marcus was subsidizing it, was now crushing her limited budget. Sarah was sitting in her office, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, when the bell above the front door chimed. She looked up to see a familiar figure browsing through the racks of evening gowns, and her heart nearly stopped. It was David. He looked different, older and more confident, wearing a well-fitted suit that emphasized how much his body had changed. His shoulders were broader, his posture straighter, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength that made him seem like a completely different person. "Hello, Sarah," he said when he noticed her watching him. His voice was warm but cautious, the tone of someone speaking to an acquaintance rather than a former spouse. "David," Sarah managed, standing up on shaking legs, "what are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood for a business meeting. I heard about your boutique and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing." Sarah looked around at her beautiful store, which suddenly felt like a monument to her own poor judgment. "I'm doing well," she lied. "Business is good." David nodded politely, but Sarah could see in his eyes that he knew better. He had always been able to read her, even when she didn't want to be read. "The store is beautiful," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "You always had excellent taste. I'm glad you got the chance to use it." The kindness in his voice was almost harder to bear than anger would have been. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes and tried to blink them away. "How are you doing?" she asked, desperate to change the subject away from her own failures. "I'm good, really good actually. The business is growing faster than I ever expected. We just signed a contract to do all the electrical work on that new hotel complex downtown." Sarah knew the project he was talking about. It was one of the biggest construction jobs in the city, the kind of contract that could set a company up for years of success. "That's wonderful," she said, and meant it. "I always knew you had it in you to build something amazing." David smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young man she had married. "It took me a while to figure out what I was capable of.
Sometimes we need to lose something important before we learn to fight for what we want. Sarah wondered if he was talking about his business or about her, and she was afraid to ask. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. Sarah wanted to tell him everything about Marcus, about the pregnancy, about how wrong she had been about what would make her happy, but the words stuck in her throat. "I should let you get back to work," David said finally. "It was good to see you, Sarah. You look well." He turned to leave, and Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "David, wait!" He paused at the door, looking back at her with patient eyes. "I'm glad you're happy," she said. "I'm glad things worked out for you." David studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through to her soul, the way he always had. "Are you happy, Sarah?" he asked gently. "Really?" Sarah opened her mouth to lie again, to maintain the facade that everything in her life was perfect. But looking into David's eyes, seeing the genuine concern there, she found she couldn't do it. "I thought I would be," she whispered. "I thought I knew what I wanted." David took a step back toward her, his expression softening. "And now? Now, I'm not sure I know anything at all." They looked at each other across the boutique, two people who had shared a life and lost it, both changed by the experience in ways they were only beginning to understand. "Sarah," David said carefully, "if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you know you can call me, right?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I mean it. Whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes we both made, that doesn't change the fact that I care about you. I always will." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with the echo of his words and the realization of what she had given up. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, Marcus's apartment, she reminded herself, and thought about the choices that had brought her to this point. She thought about the young woman who had stood in a church 7 years earlier, promising to love David for better or worse, and wondered when she had stopped meaning those words. She thought about Marcus, about the way he had made her feel special and important, and how that feeling had been worth more to her than David's steady, reliable love. She had traded substance for glamour, security for excitement, and she was only now beginning to understand the true cost of that trade. The pregnancy was progressing, and Sarah knew she needed to make decisions about her future. She could try to raise the child alone, struggling to keep the boutique afloat while Marcus systematically undermining her efforts. She could give up the business and try to start over somewhere else, building a simpler life focused on being a good mother. Or she could swallow her pride and ask for help from the one person who had never stopped caring about her well-being. The choice, when it came down to it, was easier than she had expected. Sarah called David the next morning, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice professionally polite, until he realized who was calling. "Sarah, is everything okay?" "No," she said, and the admission felt like a dam breaking inside her chest. "No, David, everything is not okay. And I was wondering if you meant what you said yesterday, about being able to call you if I needed anything." "Of course I meant it. What's wrong?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that once she said the words, there would be no taking them back. "I'm pregnant, and I'm alone, and I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had been dropped. Then David's voice came through, gentle and steady. "Where are you right now?" "At home, at my apartment." "I'm coming over. Don't go anywhere." David arrived 30 minutes later, still wearing his work clothes but carrying a bag of groceries and looking like he had dropped everything to respond to her call. Sarah opened the door and burst into tears at the sight of him, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. "Hey," he said softly, setting down the groceries and pulling her into his arms. "It's okay. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." Sarah cried against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him and marveling at how safe she felt for the first time in months. When her tears finally subsided, David led her to the couch and made her tea while she told him everything. She told him about Marcus's coldness when she revealed her pregnancy, about the systematic way he was destroying her business, about the loneliness and fear that had been consuming her. David listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just providing the steady presence she had forgotten she missed so desperately. "I don't expect anything from you," Sarah said when she had finished her story. "I know I have no right to ask for your help after what I did to us, but I didn't know who else to turn to." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "You broke my heart, Sarah. When you left, I thought I might not survive it." "I know. I'm so sorry. But you know what I realized while I was putting myself back together? I realized that loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even when their happiness doesn't include you. I spent 2 years being angry at you, but underneath the anger, I never stopped caring about your well-being." Sarah looked at this man who had grown so much stronger and wiser in their time apart, and felt a profound sense of loss for what they might have been if she had been able to appreciate what they had. "The baby isn't mine," David continued, "and I can't pretend that doesn't complicate things. But you're carrying a child who's going to need stability and love, and you deserve support during this time, regardless of what happened between us." "What are you saying?" David met her eyes, his expression serious but kind. "I'm saying that I want to help you, if you'll let me. Not because I expect anything in return, not because I think this will fix what broke between us, but because it's the right thing to do. You shouldn't have to go through this alone." Over the following weeks, David proved himself to be exactly the man Sarah remembered falling in love with, but with a maturity and confidence that made him even better. He helped her negotiate an exit from the boutique lease that wouldn't bankrupt her, using his business connections and hard-won negotiating skills to stand up to Marcus's lawyers. He helped her find a smaller apartment she could afford on her own, one with good schools nearby and a nursery that got beautiful morning light. More importantly, he provided emotional support without asking for anything in return. He drove her to doctor's appointments, helped her shop for baby supplies, and listened when she needed to talk through her fears about becoming a single mother. He never once made her feel like a burden or suggested that she owed him anything for his kindness. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked him one evening as they assembled a crib in what would be the baby's room. "After everything I put you through, why are you being so good to me?" David paused in his work, considering the question seriously. "Because this is who I am, Sarah. This is who I've always been, even when I didn't know how to show it properly. I'm someone who takes care of the people he loves, even when that love is complicated. You still love me? I'll always love you, in some way. But I'm not the same man you married, and you're not the same woman who left me. Maybe someday we'll figure out if the people we've become could build something together. But right now, the most important thing is making sure you and this baby are okay." Sarah's daughter was born on a crisp October morning, healthy and beautiful, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Sarah held her for the first time and felt a love more powerful than anything she had ever experienced. a fierce protectiveness that made her previous obsessions with status and material things seem laughably trivial. David was in the waiting room during the delivery, and when the nurse asked if Sarah wanted him to come in to meet the baby, she said yes without hesitation. He entered the room quietly, his eyes soft with wonder as he looked at the tiny person Sarah cradled in her arms. "She's perfect," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Would you like to hold her?" Sarah asked.
David's hands trembled slightly as he took the baby, but his touch was gentle and sure. The infant opened her eyes and seemed to study his face with the same serious expression she had worn since birth. "Hello, little one," David murmured. "Welcome to the world." Sarah watched them together and felt something shift in her heart, a recognition of what family actually meant. It wasn't about blood or biology or legal documents. It was about the people who showed up when you needed them, who loved without conditions, who chose to stay when leaving would be easier. "David," she said softly. He looked up from the baby, his eyes shining. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me, Sarah. This isn't a transaction. This is just love." As the months passed, David continued to be a steady presence in Sarah and her daughter Emma's lives. He helped with midnight feedings and diaper changes, taught Sarah how to manage her finances as a single mother, and slowly became the closest thing Emma had to a father figure. He never overstepped boundaries or presumed on Sarah's gratitude, but his care and commitment were unwavering. Sarah found herself falling in love again, not with the fantasy of who David might become or what he might give her, but with the reality of who he was. She loved his patience when Emma was fussy, his gentle humor when Sarah was exhausted, his quiet strength that never needed to announce itself. She loved the way he had grown during their time apart, becoming more confident and successful while somehow remaining the fundamentally decent man she had married. But she also understood that love alone wasn't enough to rebuild what they had lost. Trust, once broken, had to be earned back slowly and carefully. David had every reason to be cautious about opening his heart to her again, and Sarah knew she needed to prove that she had truly changed, that she had learned from her mistakes. One evening, when Emma was 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in her crib, Sarah and David sat together on the couch in her small apartment. It was a far cry from the luxury she had briefly known, but it felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since leaving their first apartment years earlier. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice hesitant, "about us, about what we might be able to build together." David looked at her carefully. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "I've reached the conclusion that I was an idiot, that I threw away the best thing I ever had because I was too shallow and immature to recognize its value." "Sarah!" "No, let me finish. I need to say this." Sarah turned to face him fully. "I spent 2 years chasing after things that I thought would make me happy. Money, status, excitement, the approval of people who didn't even really know me. And you know what I learned?"
What?
"I learned that happiness isn't something you can buy or achieve or win. It's something you build day by day with the people who matter to you. It's something you create through small acts of kindness and big acts of commitment. It's what we had, David, and I was too stupid to see it.
What?
I learned that happiness isn't something you can buy or achieve or win. It's something you build day by day with the people who matter to you. It's something you create through small acts of kindness and big acts of commitment.
It's what we had, David, and I was too stupid to see it.
David,
Was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful.
people change, Sarah. We've both changed. The question isn't whether we can go back to what we had, because we can't. The question is whether we can build something new and better with who we are now.
Do you think we can?
I think, David paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you've learned some hard lessons about what really matters in life. I think I've learned some things too, about not taking love for granted and about fighting for what's important. I think Emma deserves to grow up in a home filled with love and stability.
And I think, he continued, reaching over to take Sarah's hand, that I never stopped believing we could find our way back to each other if we were both willing to do the work.
Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they were tears of hope rather than regret.
I want to do the work, David. I want to be the woman you deserve, and the mother Emma deserves. I want to build a real life with you, not based on what we can afford or where we live or what other people think of us, but based on how much we love each other and how committed we are to making it work.
David squeezed her hand. It won't be easy. There's a lot of hurt to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild.
I know, but I'm not the same person who ran away when things got difficult. I'm ready to stay and fight for what matters.
David smiled then, the first completely unreserved smile Sarah had seen from him since before their divorce. Then, let's fight for it. Let's fight for us.
They were married again 8 months later, in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Emma, now walking and babbling constantly, served as an adorable, if unpredictable flower girl, toddling down the aisle and stopping to examine every petal she dropped. Sarah wore a simple white dress she had bought from a department store, and David wore a suit he already owned, and neither of them cared that the wedding cost less than Sarah used to spend on a single dinner with Marcus. What mattered was the love they declared for each other, tempered by experience and strengthened by adversity. What mattered were the vows they made, promising to choose each other every day, to work through problems instead of running from them, to build a life based on shared values rather than shared ambitions. In the years that followed, David's business continued to thrive, eventually growing into one of the most successful electrical contracting companies in the city. But success looked different to them now than it had when they were younger. It meant being able to provide security for Emma, to save for her education, to help their aging parents. It meant having the freedom to spend time together as a family, to take modest vacations and enjoy simple pleasures. Sarah never opened another boutique, but she found fulfillment in other ways. She started a small consulting business, helping other women who were trying to rebuild their lives after divorce or other major setbacks. She volunteered at a shelter for women leaving abusive relationships, using her own experience of learning to distinguish between love and manipulation to help others recognize the difference. Most importantly, she learned to find joy in the everyday moments that she had once dismissed as boring or ordinary. Emma's first words, family dinners around their kitchen table, Sunday mornings spent reading the newspaper while David made pancakes. These became the treasures of her life, more valuable than any designer dress or expensive jewelry. Sometimes, late at night when Emma was asleep and she and David were cleaning up the kitchen together, Sarah would think about the path that had brought them to this place. She would remember the woman she had been, so eager for external validation that she had been willing to abandon everything real in pursuit of an illusion. The mistakes she had made were painful to recall, but she was grateful for them in a way, because they had taught her lessons she couldn't have learned any other way.
She had learned that real love wasn't about what someone could give you, but about what you were willing to give them. She had learned that security came not from a bank account, but from being surrounded by people who would stand by you when times got tough. She had learned that the most profound happiness came not from achieving your dreams, but from discovering that your dreams had been too small all along. As for Marcus, Sarah occasionally heard news of him through the social pages or business reports. He had moved on to other relationships, always with beautiful younger women who lasted a year or two before being replaced. He had never married again, never had children, and seemed content with a life of expensive pleasures and shallow connections. Sarah felt no anger toward him anymore, only a kind of sad understanding. He had given her exactly what he had promised, a glimpse of a glittering world where money could buy almost anything, except the things that truly mattered. One evening, 5 years after their remarriage, Sarah and David were walking through the park near their house, while Emma rode her bicycle ahead of them, calling back to make sure they were watching her latest trick. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Sarah felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never gotten divorced?" David asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes, but I think we needed to go through what we went through to become the people we are now. I needed to learn what I was really looking for in life, and you needed to learn how strong you could be on your own. Do you regret it? The time we lost, the pain we caused each other?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching Emma laugh with pure joy as she mastered a new skill. "I regret the pain. I'll always regret hurting you the way I did. But I can't regret the journey that brought us here, because here is exactly where I want to be." David stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands on her shoulders. "I love you, Sarah. Not the woman you were, not the woman you thought you wanted to become, but the woman you actually are. Right here, right now." "I love you too," Sarah replied, and meant it with every cell in her body. "More than I ever knew it was possible to love someone." They kissed there in the park, with Emma calling "Ew, gross" from her bicycle, and other families walking by with knowing smiles. It was a perfectly ordinary moment, the kind Sarah had once thought was boring, and now recognized as the stuff of which real happiness is made. That night, after Emma was tucked into bed and they had finished their evening routine, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, writing in the journal she had kept since Emma's birth. She wrote about gratitude, about second chances, about the difference between wanting something and actually needing it. She wrote about the woman she had been and the woman she had become, and about the long, sometimes painful journey between the two. She wrote about fate and how sometimes what seems like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be exactly what needed to happen. She wrote about love, real love, the kind that stays when the excitement fades and the glamour wears off. She wrote about the lesson she had learned the hard way, that the greatest treasures in life are often the ones we already have, if only we're wise enough to recognize their value. And as she wrote, Sarah smiled, knowing that she would never again make the mistake of trading away something precious in pursuit of something that merely glittered. She had found her way home, to the life and the love that had been waiting for her all along, and she intended to treasure them for the rest of her days.